You're listening to the Creative Process Podcast. Here you will discover what drives musicians to create music and how they realize that ambition. I'm your host, Jamie Collin, founder of the online independent music magazine, Overblown. This episode is sponsored by Indie Tracks. Indie Tracks is a celebration of independent, creative, and DIY pop music. It takes place on a heritage steam railway site in the heart of the Derbyshire countryside from the 28th to the 30th of July 2017. Go to indietracks.co.uk for more information. This episode is sponsored by Vinylify. Vinylify is an online service that offers consumers the opportunity to create their own unique 10-inch vinyl in a few easy steps. Go to vinylify.com, that's vinylify.com, upload your music, then personalize your cover art and your matching labels. Vinylify then cuts the vinyl by hand, presses the cover, and delivers it to your doorstep. We've teamed up with Vinylify to get you 10% off your first order. Simply input the code 77HG3H at checkout. The code is valid until the 17th of July. There's no way I could describe Washed Out's music better than the description on his Facebook page. Washed Out is Ernest Greene, a young boy from Georgia via South Carolina who makes bedroom synth pop that sounds blurred and woozily evocative, like someone smeared Vaseline all over an early OMD demo tape, then stayed up all night trying to recreate what they heard. I spoke to Ernest about the irony of creating flawed human music with computers and why it is important to him to continue to progress and develop as an artist. The new album, Mr. Mellow, is a multimedia experience, and I think perhaps a bit of a commentary on, the quick fix kind of throwaway music culture that we have these days.
Sure.
So how was the concept behind the album originally conceived?
After kind of touring for the last record, I knew I wanted to do something a bit different stylistically. The last record I put together myself. There was quite a bit more kind of live instrumentation, and that was mainly driven by the fact that we had like a full kind of 5-piece rock band setup. That can be a little bit limiting though, when you're in the studio. So I kind of put that idea aside of, writing for the live show and just sort of saw what I could come up with without any limitation. Technically, that's kind of where these songs started. There's a lot more kind of collage and sampling in play, which I think definitely informs the feel of everything. And then a lot of the themes and stuff, like in the lyrics, some of the visual content, that came a little bit later. I'm kind of jealous of songwriters who can like create characters or alternative universes or whatever. I mean, for me, it's always whatever I'm feeling that day. I'm sitting down to work. Starts from a very simple place of just the way I'm feeling, but the hope is always that people can connect with it. But that's kind of like the main idea, I guess, of where things started. It's certainly as far as all of the details and how kind of wide ranging it ended up. I think that mainly had to do with taking a lot of time this go around. I think Paracosm was written in 3 months and recorded in a month or two, and then it was out in the world. Where this definitely wanted to take some more time to just really make sure that, everything was how I wanted it to look and feel, That's kind of an issue I've had with working on my own. I imagine, in a proper band situation when there's multiple people involved, they can keep each other in check and also have creative dialogues about criticism and all of that. And the best way for me to get around that with just being on my own, I've found, is just to sort of take breaks from the material here and there. So that played into some of the weight too, but overall I certainly don't regret it.
If you're creating something and you're right in the middle of it, it's kind of difficult to take a step back and to even realize or even figure out whether it's good, is it bad. Taking a break is essential, and particularly, as you say, when you don't necessarily have too many people to bounce ideas off of.
Totally, yeah. I mean, that's definitely one of my biggest struggles. And I've sort of figured out a few little tricks to kind of help step outside of myself a bit and hopefully, have a better understanding of what the average person would think. And actually that's one reason why the video side of the record kind of happened. I was actually really inspired by a lot of just kind of avant-garde, kind of weirder animation that I was kind of discovering mainly online. And I would just sort of mute whatever the audio was for the video and would just play the demos I was working on over the top. And for me, it kind of, again, like helped me sort of step outside of my like producer mode and just sort of, and somehow the visuals would kind of amplify certain aspects that I thought was interesting. And so I found myself constantly doing that, and I had a few of my favorite videos that I felt like, aesthetics kind of fell in line with what the music felt like, and sort of had the aha moment of like, well, why don't I actually reach out to some of these animators and directors and see if they would be into working on this project and kind of collaborating. And it kind of worked out where, I had a list of 10 or 12 people, and for the most part, everyone was game to work on it. It's absolutely a dream come true, because I've always been a visual thinker. When I'm with every demo I put together, I'm sort of like imagining certain things, and to see it all like completely come to life is really exciting. Just offers another layer. That's one complaint I get sometimes, is like it's hard to understand the lyrics or whatever, but I think a lot of the stuff that's happening in the video will definitely inform, people's interpretation of the song.
You said there you had a number of tricks that you use to step outside your role. What kind of things do you do?
Kind of stole another trick. I have like a turntable that's sitting next to my computer, and it's just as simple as putting a record on and like putting the needle down, but having it muted again. And like, it's like somehow that visual cue or whatever just helps, like this is a finished record, I'm putting it on, like as a listener, how does it make me feel? That sort of thing. Even just kind of casually listening in different scenarios, and also alongside other songs that I'm fans of, like a dinner party or whatever, I'll like slip in a demo I'm working on, just see people, how they react to it, if they react to it. And I found that in a really interesting way, you can kind of listen through their ears when you're in the room with them hearing it for the first time. I don't know if that makes sense at all, but it's essential working as a solo producer, kind of coming out with stuff like that.
Plunderphonics and Music Concrete are influences on the album, and I was wondering, how are they suitable for the concept?
That was kind of starting out with the record. I felt like I was after something a little different than I'd done in the past. I mentioned with Paracosm, it was recorded mostly with live instrumental takes, like in a proper studio, and the idea was to get a recording that was as pristine and kind of, using all the modern kind of bells and whistles. With this record, definitely wanted to flip that on its head a bit, kind of embrace imperfection in a way, and try to be okay with having things be a little sloppy. So much character can kind of come through with work like that. And so I knew that I wanted it to be kind of crazy and erratic. One of the ways to accomplish that is to have a lot of layers of sound. And that's the fun part with me with kind of like collage and sampling. It takes elements from all over the place and you stack them on top of one another, and you can get lucky and some really interesting things can happen that you never would think of, just like sitting down at a piano or guitar or whatever. The Music Concrete stuff and all of that kind of textural stuff was a big part of that. I spent a lot of time on YouTube just kind of like pulling random bits of audio, a lot of like voiceover. I was really kind of doing it at random, but I was able in the end to kind of pull out, even if it's just simple phrases, sort of helps shed a light on some of the themes in a more clear way than even the lyrics do. I think that the interlude kind of moments for me is sort of narrating what's happening. There's not really an obvious through line throughout the entire thing, but I think it's constantly touching on the same kind of emotions and themes. And I love kind of taking that stuff out of context and then, putting weird effects on it or whatever.
It's quite interesting, the YouTube idea. It's nearly like a field recording.
Oh, totally, without a doubt. But being able to just move so quickly through the process of like digging for stuff. I was actually having a conversation with someone yesterday about how, when I first started, there was almost this kind of unwritten rule that, it's got to be on vinyl and you have to put in the work of like going to record shops, but that just takes so much time to it's hard enough just digging through anything to find like the rare kind of beautiful moment. But with YouTube, that process is like, and it's just so much easier just to put in like whatever, a funny phrase and just see what you come up with in the result.
This episode is sponsored by Indie Tracks. Each year, around 50 new and established DIY indie pop artists perform across a range of stages at the festival. Visitors are free to enjoy steam train rides, railway attractions and museums, discos, art and craft workshops, great food, and a selection of real ales. Artists performing at this year's festival include The Wedding Present, Kate LeBond, Martha, Joanna Gruesome, Frankie Cosmos, The Tuts, The Wave Pictures, and Skinny Girl Diet. Go to indietracks.co.uk to purchase tickets now. This episode is sponsored by Vinylify. Vinylify is an online service that offers consumers the opportunity to create their own unique 10-inch vinyl in a few easy steps. Go to vinylify.com, that's vinylify.com, upload your music, then personalize your cover art and your matching labels. Vinylify then cuts the vinyl by hand, presses the cover, and delivers it to your doorstep. We've teamed up with Vinylify to get you 10% off your first order. Simply input the code 77HG3H at checkout. The code is valid until the 17th of July.
And it seems to me as well, obviously this is an album as a whole, and I think you said that you really value an album of music as an entity. And I was wondering, why do you value the album as an entity?
That's a good question, and it's funny because after the last record ended up kind of being presented in a similar way, where the songs kind of flow into one another, and after doing that, I was like, well, I'm never going to do that again, or at least for this record, I'm just going to write songs for the very reason that you mentioned. That I do agree. I think a lot of of your average listeners gravitate towards a couple songs and that's it, which is fine. But I guess just the way that I think or the way that I work, I start writing songs and then I see subtle connections between the two, or between the handful of stuff that I'm working on, and I want to connect all of those dots, and I quickly find that I get deeper and deeper into trying just to make things as clear and concise and connected as possible, and before you know it, you have a full-blown visual album with all of these crazy nuances and all of that. So, in some levels it got a little bit out of hand, but at the same time, like I said, it's like kind of a labor of love and like an ultimate fantasy for me to kind of take it as far as it's gone,
And it seems as well for me with the videos for the project, there's obviously a variety of styles like collage, claymation, stop motion, but it seems to me that what all the styles have in common is the fact that they have to be tangibly made.
That's really cool that you picked up on. That was the message that I was hoping to send. With all, a lot of time if you're working with that many people, the fear is that there's not going to be any kind of unifying element. I think that's the beautiful thing about the film, is that you get a real sense of like this kind of human touch to everything. Although it's filtered through so many different styles, I think that hopefully that's what people can take away from the music as well. That like some of the things I was saying earlier, that it's a little bit crazy in parts and a little sloppy in parts, and when compared to most of the stuff you hear on the radio or whatever, where it's just been edited to like the most minute little details, this was definitely a reaction against that.
So I suppose trying to add the human element,
which is such a challenge when you're working. This record was put together like 95% of it just on the computer. But there's little tricks that I've figured out that help with that, and obviously kind of the collage and the sampling and the field recordings and all of that help with that as well.
It's even kind of ironic, I guess, that using computers so much to try and add a human element back.
Yeah, you're totally right. And it's funny, like I would say probably half the videos were done just completely kind of analog style, and then the other half were made to appear like that, but yeah, they still were kind of put together with digital kind of modern equipment.
You said before that you feel privileged to be in a position to create music full time. By changing styles so much, do you ever worry about that it might be rejected by your audience, and does that kind of impact your creative process?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think I don't know if it's clear, from just a handful of listens, but that was a big part, or what kind of fed that feeling of sort of anxiety of like, well, am I making music for like my personal pleasure, or am I making music for what I kind of imagine as like this entity that's like our average washed out fan? And kind of worrying about which is the right path to take. And in the end, this record is wholly in line with like what I'm into at the moment. And so yeah, there's always a fear that the people that were into the last record might not be along for the ride for this one.
Yeah.
But at the same time, hopefully it might appeal to an entire different group of people or whatever. But that's the challenge, and a lot of like insecurity comes along with that. I think it's only natural. But I've never been the kind that just writes in any traditional way of, like I mentioned earlier, kind of talking about just sitting down at a piano or whatever and writing a song. Like, it's never really worked like that for me. So, like, I never know where I'm going to end up. I could never kind of recreate a formula or anything. So with that, it comes a lot of anxiety of like, oh shit, like what's the next album going to be? Or so yeah, a lot of those worries are kind of like tucked into the themes. I didn't want it to be any kind of like downer vibe. The idea was to sort of make fun of that, and a lot of the artwork and marketing, PR and stuff is about that, of like alluding to the fact that everything's not perfect and cheery, but always kind of being tongue in cheek about it.
It's nearly a kind of a dystopian vibe, which is obviously very, very serious. But then the music, as you're saying, is a lot lighter than that, than you would think.
Sure.
If you were thinking about dystopia literature.
Yeah, I mean that's it's like the only way to really do it. Like I said earlier, like it started from some general feelings that I had, and sometimes when you're in those situations, it feels so it's like self-serious, but if you kind of take a step back, you realize that like a lot of the issues I'm facing, like so many other creative people are currently dealing with the same thing, and there was quite a bit of insecurity about just getting older and just having to be more responsible and worried about what I'm going to be doing 10 years from now, whatever. And if you take a step back, you realize like everybody who's in their 30s is thinking that.
Yeah.
Knowing that fact, you can kind of make light of it and poke fun at it, and hopefully everyone's kind of in on that joke.
As I said earlier, your music is constantly developing and changing, and I was wondering why is that important to you?
I kind of touched on it earlier. I feel like depending on the day or kind of a working mode, like I never really know where I'm going to end up with, and it's only natural that I guess a part of that being that I'm just constantly interested in new things that I hear or new things I discover. I mean, that can be music, of course, but it also could be like stuff I see in a film or whatever. I think, I mentioned earlier the watching so much animation and stuff, like it started to really influence the feel of the music. So I try to just constantly be open to those types of discoveries and, just kind of continue to grow, and hopefully, listeners will want to be along for the ride. But yeah, I just have a hard time kind of doing the same thing over and over again. Maybe I should do more of that. Seems like the bands that are around the longest tend to like have their formula and they sort of stick with it. Casual fans love that, so we'll see.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Creative Process Podcast. Make sure to check out the show notes in our podcast section at overblown.co.uk. Here you will find links to everything mentioned in this episode. Overblown and the Creative Process Podcast are both an entirely DIY venture. If you enjoyed the podcast, you can become a patron of Overblown at patreon.com/Overblown. See you down the front.